Hey everyone, I'm Jay.
And I'm Scott, and welcome to Witches Betwixt.
So Sophia's not with us today because she is recovering from a voice surgery that she had at the Yizan Voice Center in Seoul, South Korea. I was trying to remember the pronunciation of that. I'm pretty sure it was Yizan. Um, yeah, so she can't talk for the next 7 to 8 weeks or something like that. So these next couple episodes, we're going to do something a little different. We still want Sophia to very much have a voice, even though she technically doesn't have a voice right now,
Right.
physically. We want her to still have a voice on the podcast. So we asked her to write up like a summary of her opinion on the topic that we're going to be talking about today. And then I'm going to read it before me and Scott get into the main topic. And I especially didn't want her to be out of this episode because the topic is misogyny in misogyny in witch communities and misogyny in queer communities. So yeah, I didn't want to have Sophia not be able to chime in on that.
I kept
Uh,
saying the same
yes.
thing.
But I think it's a really relevant topic. I kind of shotgunned the idea into our group chat the other day because I keep seeing it everywhere and it's bad. It's just I feel like it's just getting worse, and it's so prevalent in each community that I'm really a part of. And we were just recently at Pride, and I don't know. I just have a lot of things to say, and I'm sure Scott has been seeing some things too here and there. So, but let's start off with Sophia's take on this. And I have it on my phone, so I'm not going to be like staring at the camera the whole time, but I'm going to try to look. So here's Sophia's take on misogyny. She says, misogyny in magic groups. Oh God, where do I begin? True. It's a huge topic, so I will try not to rant on about this because I could write a whole book on it. True, and we could probably do about 10,000 episodes on this subject. She says, basically men, especially cis men, are so used to everything being for them and about them that it's the automatic expected standard that it applies to every situation. What happens with magic groups can be especially bad because there's this weird dynamic to magic groups already. Because nobody usually knows anybody unless you've been in a group for a while, people often have to prove what they know in some kind of weird assertion of the ego.
Mhm.
More often than proving what you have to prove who you are to people. There's a weird dynamic where people listen less to what is being said than they do who's saying it. Back when I was viewed as a straight, white, cis male, almost everything I said would have support from the group status quo. If I was mad or upset about something, people listened because they thought I had validity. But post transition, it's literally the opposite. People don't listen because I'm not a straight white cis man in their eyes anymore, and any complaint or problem I have gets chalked up to me being emotional or lashing out. The exact methods that society as a whole uses to dismiss women gets applied in magic groups too, except it's magnified because we can't talk in empirical terms. While it is possible to beat a man into submission with scientific knowledge and facts when it's irrefutable, you cannot do that with opinions and personal experiences. Since so much of magic is subjective and personal, there's no real right or wrong. This leads to women's experiences having no grounds for being able to prove their validity, and thus will almost always be dismissed unless the woman in question has considerable pull with the specific group she's in. This has led me personally to step away from every group I'm affiliated with, because if you rock the boat, then people take that as reason for dismissing you. It's a real double bind too, because if they cannot dismiss you as emotional, which I certainly assure you they will attempt to do, they can simply ignore you and talk over you. Magic groups these days seem to be less about practice and sharing, and more about politics and group agreement. Nuanced conversation gets sacrificed so that echo chambers can exist. It's far easier just to find the people who agree with you and listen to them than it will ever be to listen to people who disagree with you. Very seldomly do people want to have anything other than their personal thoughts and opinions validated, and if you do not follow this cycle, then you're left out to dry. So naturally, this affects anyone who falls outside of the status quo, which happens to include people of color, women, trans people, and queer people. Misogyny is just an extension of dominant society's need for status quo and obedience from everyone who falls outside that very narrow category. And I can see Scott shaking his head the whole time, and me too. So yeah, I absolutely, Sophia. I don't disagree with you on any of these points, and I don't think we really disagree.
Can I also
But
say, Sophia, I'm sorry, that was beautifully written. Just
yeah, that was
also
great,
that.
and I hope I did enough justice to it reading it.
You did. It sounded very nice.
So yeah, let's you want to talk about magic groups first, or you want to talk about queer
Yeah,
community first?
let's talk about magic groups first. So magic groups. Okay, I'm going to be a little bit harsh. To magical groups.
You
They're
suck. I'm just kidding.
no.
Do better.
But definitely do better.
Mhm.
They're innately cliquey anyway. Even without talking about misogyny. They there is this kind of in the witchcraft community we definitely have this, they want to see your papers, like,
Mhm.
why should I listen to you? And it's interesting to see that connected back to this idea of dominance, misogyny, status quo, which oddly enough I don't think my mind ever did. I always just thought it was pompousness. I always
Mhm.
just thought it was this putting on airs and this aura of pomp,
Right.
But I mean, which I still think it is, but to understand the underlying factor, it's interesting that Sophia kind of did that, because I could totally see that.
Mhm.
Um, I mean, and it definitely is a oh man, because I've had so many experiences in which you would think would contradict, right? But I don't even think that they do. I've had so many experiences in which the need to be dominant in the man, I have a lot to say and it's just kind of jumbled. Okay, so what I'm trying to simply get at is I've had many experience in which people have talked at me and
Mm.
have belittled me for my opinion on a topic of magic, instead of talking to me why I felt the way I felt and why it is that maybe I should change my mind in a polite, a polite way that was, healthy discourse, instead of them talking at me, kind of being like, you're an idiot because you didn't do this, and have you ever actually done this kind of sorcery? And if you haven't studied this particular system of magic, well, you're doing it all wrong, you know?
So you're just talking about right now. You're just talking about the general pompousness of magic groups in general.
Right. But
Yeah.
I think it applies because what happens is, because of the dynamic that misogyny creates, right?
Mhm.
Um, it starts becoming about, people start becoming defensive.
Mm. So would you say that maybe also maybe people who are maybe a bit more effeminate, or like that kind of straddle both kind of worlds, in terms of like how they are gender expression, that they can also be subject to the issues that misogyny kind of creates within
Right.
these magic groups.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe so this like really strong, I don't know, strong opinioned fucking armchair wizard is, oh well, blah 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 blah, this is what I think, and if you don't think this too, you're wrong, is saying to you, the trad witch who's like, bones and stones and shake the rattle, it's just like it's seen as, I think we talked about this before, it's seen as low magic, right?
Yeah, yep. The
Low magic,
feminine, low
women's
magic,
magic.
women magic, feminine, more
Mhm.
passive magic. Um,
Which honestly, I don't. sometimes when I talk to some, like, not really talk, I don't really talk to them. I kind of just lurk in magic groups because of this problem. I become more of a lurker. So I notice, like, I don't know. It's just I think like tradcraft in general is kind of just dismissed. But I don't really view it. I view tradcraft as more of an active form of magic than, say, all these chaos magic theories and this and that. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, yeah.
if you will it into exist, you can sit here and think about a whole spell, and you know what I mean. I mean, I'm sure you can, but
I mean, I think that
I
there are
view that as more
facets.
passive.
I think that there are facets of that apply. It's funny because a lot of the time too, well, you have these kind of two systems of magic that historically intersect almost consistently, which is, high ceremonial magic and traditional craft. Now,
Mhm.
traditional craft, now, while of course people are like, rich people were practicing, witchcraft back in medieval blah 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 time,
Mhm.
blah. And it's like, sure, of course, there were very wealthy women who practiced magic.
Mhm.
Um, but the thing is that predominantly people who practice magic were the cunning folk, things healers, village, whatever's,
Mhm.
predominantly cunning folk, who
It was
were
the
not
craft of the
educated.
people.
Right. They weren't educated. What they would do is they would look at the symbols, and some of them were kind of like, some of them were literate enough to understand like the gist of what the sigil and symbols were, or
Yeah.
the gist of what was supposed to happen, but they weren't literate enough to, thous and I mean, that's how they talk, but you know what I'm trying to
Mhm.
say. It wasn't this educated man's magic.
Right.
Um,
They didn't have big tomes of magic words and all
right,
kinds. It
right.
wasn't. They weren't in their robes and cloaks and their 8,000 incenses burning. They weren't. Yeah. It wasn't like that. It wasn't rich
No,
man's magic.
no. Um, so what was I? Where was I? I apologize.
So I kind of forget exactly where you were, but I was curious if did you have any like examples where misogyny was particularly, or magic groups in general were just particularly didn't make you feel welcome.
Mm, um, it's more about the voice thing. Like having a voice in magical spaces. I find that now I don't know if it's because they perceive it as femininity,
Mhm.
um, which obviously I have a lot of,
Mhm.
or if they perceive it just as overly gentle.
Mm.
I don't know if you
Which
noticed
is viewed as weak, maybe.
right. But that comes from misogynistic and dominant, the need for
Right,
dominance and
because the
misogyny.
idea of being gentle is associated with femininity and therefore associated with weakness.
Exactly,
It's
exactly.
a terrible trickle down effect when honestly some of our most terrifying goddesses, entities, figures in folklore and folk magic have been women.
Right,
And there's some of them are forces to be reckoned with.
right. I mean, so I mean, as far as that, as far as my not like I don't desire to argue. I'm
Mhm.
not going to get into flame wars with witches on the internet about.
When you were younger, did you? Were you a bit more argumentative when you were younger?
I'm actually a little bit more argumentative now. That's
Mm.
only because of therapy and learning to say no. Learning
And
to
to
kind of
stand
be
your
like,
ground.
yeah. But when I was younger, I would run. I would get scared, and I would be like, okay, bye, and I would like quickly like delete and like
Yeah.
I would get rid of everything.
Did you think that maybe like, oh yeah, they're right, like I don't know enough, I don't know enough? Was it maybe a bit of that?
Absolutely. I mean, I would always get, you would. I mean, I used to question my craft, and I used to question myself all the time. It only took me up until maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 years ago now, where I've really kind of be like where I'm really confident in my craft, where I truly know in my craft.
Mhm.
Without like overly kind of being like, you don't know as much as you do, the imposter syndrome. Uh that kind of happens with magic in general. So for me, like I said, it was mostly this kind of like, well, you're timid and your voice is like, small. I would like whenever I would disagree, I would disagree in a healthy way. I would kind of be like, well, what do you think about this? I kind of don't know if I feel the same. And it was very polite, and it was
Instead of just
never.
shutting someone down and saying, no, you're
Mhm.
wrong.
Right, right. I was very polite, and then people would attack me, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I mean that is something that I've experienced. I did now. I mean, I've witnessed other things. Like one thing I do want to talk about, and we've talked about this before, but this is still a part of it. Um, most of the authors coming out right now are gay white men.
Mhm.
As
There's just nothing
amazing
wrong
as
with that.
No, there
So,
isn't. There
right.
isn't anything intrinsically wrong with that at all. But the thing is that there are other voices in this community,
Yes.
that we need to be looking at. I mean, there are also many women, but a lot of them are white women.
Mhm.
Um, so I
Maybe
think,
there's some. Well, I shouldn't say maybe, but there's definitely whitewashing that goes on in magic groups.
yeah, yeah.
Sure.
But I do think that there is something to be said about the fact that we're focusing our attention predominantly on, even though there's still queer men, we're
Mhm.
still predominantly focusing on men.
Mhm.
As far as the voices we want to listen to, you know.
I always find it very interesting that there are so many male authors and so many men in the spotlight of which communities, right? When historically, traditionally, it has been quote unquote more, I guess, women's a female craft. You know what I'm saying? So
Or
like how
seen as
people say,
female,
right,
sure.
exactly. So a lot of people say, well, only women can be witches, right?
Yeah.
So people say, well,
Hi,
only women.
Tumblr.
Yeah, yeah. Bye, Tumblr. So yeah, so apparently only women can be witches. Okay, so there's a statement. But and well, if only women can be witches, then why are most of our predominant witch writers men? So I mean, like it's kind of ridiculous there, but it's also a little bit ridiculous because then if only witches can be women, then why do we silence the women? Why do we go through these extra steps to quiet them and to tell them no, you're wrong or you're incorrect and what you say, oh, you're kind of right, you're almost there, honey, like it's almost like, oh, you're so cute and thank you for sharing your opinion, and but my opinion
Yeah.
is right, I don't like that. I don't like the whole are you aware of what Sophia was talking about with the whole mansplaining situation? Were you privy to that
I ended
without
up
naming
catching on to
names?
it. I ended up catching on to it a couple like a day or two
Not gonna
later.
name the group it was in just because
No.
I don't want the whole group
No.
to. Yeah, we're not here to do that. We're just here to talk about in general.
I did see the post. I was furious.
What was the situation?
Oh, what was it? I did see it. I remember comments more
So
than I
was it
remember.
Sophia that made the initial post, I believe?
It was actually Sophia's comment
To a post.
to a post, and of course Sophia likes to write a lot,
Yeah.
and the comment was lengthy, and people kind of jumped on and basically were doing that whole like, oh, women in their hysterics, like kind of like chalking it up to this kind of, she's just bitching, or you
Ah.
know it wasn't taken as seriously. There was like maybe one and a half people who were kind of on Sophia's side. There was this one person, I think they had like an anime picture as their profile picture, and they were totally on board with Sophia. But
Do you remember what the topic was about? What the content was about?
I don't. I think that I truly
You were
don't.
just so angry
I
about.
really was. I was sitting here like, and of course, I still do this thing, and this is like my own thing where like I'll type something out and it'll be like scathing, right? And
And
then I
then you're like,
delete it,
delete, delete, delete. Yeah.
like I write it again, and unfortunately, I did that over and over and over and
You missed
over,
your
and
window.
Yeah, yeah. It's just I guess this particular group anyway, there's a lot of pseudo intellectualism
Mm,
that kind of they use to battle you, but the problem with that is that you can't fight. It's hard to fight that with fact, like Sophia said.
mm-hmm.
So it's one of those things where I'd rather just stay away.
Right, you don't want to get not like, oh, I don't want to get involved, but it's
Because
not
I mean, I
worth.
would have because like if the words used were I think if they actually had used like what like derogatory words, like
Mm,
if it went to that, I think I would have been like, okay.
mm-hmm,
Okay, you know, um
mm-hmm,
if he is my friend, you're not going to do that. But they were just condescending and dismissive, know it all, bullcrap.
mm-hmm,
Um, and I mean, Sophia seemed to kind of have the last word as far as she was concerned,
mm-hmm.
and she dropped it. And
Right.
everyone else seemed to drop it. I did witness it, and of course, it was mostly the men, and it's horrible too. There's always another thing that I think about misogyny as well is how you don't ever really know the kind of men that are willing to or who are the type to get um as they like to make fun of social justice people triggered
Right.
um
Yeah.
triggered by being confronted with their misogyny. It could be the nice like a nice guy, right? A genuine nice guy
Mm-hmm,
who maybe even if they don't say, well, I'm a nice guy, and even though once they say
mm-hmm.
that, but they might not even say that, and all of a sudden they something in them reacts to getting told like you have these misogynistic beliefs from society, grooming and conditioning, and then all of a sudden they react poorly to it, and you never really know where they're going to come from sometimes. So I mean, so obviously,
True. True. I mean, yeah, there are definitely instances of that, like someone that you know and trust and just kind of just says, I mean, sometimes and sometimes this just sometimes like me, I consider like I'm a feminist. I'm trans. I know what it was like to exist in a world in a feminine space, in a female space. I know what it was like to do that. And sometimes I find myself like if I see some but I was always like this though, but if I see some female post some kind of comment, I'm like, oh my god, she's being so extra. Oh my god, she's being ridiculous. And like sometimes I have that idea, but I check myself. You know what I mean? I check myself. I'm like, okay, you know what? No, this is ridiculous. Um, but it's kind of interesting. I think about the teenage experience, right? A lot of people come into this craft when you're a teenager,
mhm,
and even that harbors its own special blend of misogyny
mhm.
because when teenage girls start getting into witchcraft magic, it's cute, right? It's ooh spooky. Oh, you're doing. Oh, it's hokey. It's Sabrina,
Yeah.
not new Sabrina, because new Sabrina is badass. It's the '90s version of Sabrina.
Point and make magic. Come up with some silly words and point at it and sparkles.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's the craft. So people view that, but when young boys start to get into magic, it's oh he's interested in the occult. You know he's gonna summon demons. He's gonna. They always go like the darker route. You know what I mean? Like, oh, he's
Yeah.
gonna do something big. And is your spirit animal a wolf, a bear? It's like okay.
Well, interesting. I mean, on a historical level, if you let me go there,
Mm,
we all know that there was a time where women were not allowed to be educated. There was a
mm.
very long time in which women were not allowed to be educated.
And it is
Now,
still prevalent in some places in the world today.
mhm, that when universities first came about, which is a lot longer than you might think, um, believe it or not, I always joke and say universities were kind of like Hogwarts originally because
They
they
were.
taught they taught thing like they taught occultism
Hmm.
and occult theology and things like that. Very esoteric and mysticism and astronomy and alchemy and et cetera. And they combine that with literature and languages and stuff like that. And
That was the time I probably would have enjoyed being in college.
right. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I always say I wish college was still like that. Um, so you also have to remember, a lot of this comes from uh it almost seems like it's been brought, kind of forward, from the past into our
Mm-hmm.
present. Because if you really look back, um, a lot of the people that we talk about, even from the past, now there are many, many women from the foundations of traditional craft and British traditional Wicca.
Mm-hmm.
You have Doreen Valiente, who is somewhere between both of the, sort of both.
Mm-hmm.
Through Valiente, you have Sybil Leek, you have Maxine Maxine Saunders.
I think
Uh, you have Janet Farrar. Um,
these are the
there's a
old
lot.
school witches from like the 70s you're talking about.
Yes, and
Mm-hmm.
all of you should look them up.
Yes.
Um,
Know your
uh,
history.
yeah. But of course, the ones that we hear about the most are Charles Leland,
Mm-hmm.
Raymond Buckland, Scott Cunningham, even though he was a bit later.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Alex Saunders.
Mm-hmm.
We hear about him a lot.
We hear about the men, and the men were usually in leadership positions. See, it's kind of funny. So you have shit. Why am I blanking on his name? The guy who's the grandfather of Wicca. Uh,
uh,
uh
Gerald
shit.
Gardner.
Gerald Gardner. Thank you. Jesus. So Gerald Gardner, right? So he's credited as being the godfather of Wicca, or the creator, because he was, as the myth goes, which is, it's kind of interesting about him because he is like a modern day myth in a way.
Yeah, yeah, in a way. No, you're totally right.
Yeah. He was apparently initiated into this coven
By his grandmother,
by his grandmother. By his
a
grandmother.
woman,
See, that's the thing.
and
He
her
was
female
initiated.
coven.
Yes, so he was initiated into this craft by her grandmother and her female coven. The coven, which we have no record of. I don't think we have any record that they ever existed. So very folk magic kind of thing. And then he, I guess, started to find followers in a sense, and started to teach the craft and whatnot. And Doreen comes into play with Gardner. Like she was kind of his right hand, right? For a bit.
She did. She got interested, but
I think
Doreen
he
Valley.
initiated her.
Oh yeah, Doreen Valiente. Yes,
Yeah,
I'm sorry. I
Doreen.
was thinking. For some reason I always get Doreen Valiente and Sybil Leek a little bit confused.
Oh
I don't
yeah.
know why that happened, but it does.
But yeah, so Doreen Valiente and Gerald Gardner, if you look up any history of the two of them, they're always talked about in the same stories and the same situations. Now, Doreen, of course, if you don't know, she is the one who wrote the infamous Charge of the Goddess. That is her writing. So, if you do come across that, that is her. It's not Gardner. Gardner did not write it. She did. And I think she also wrote an entire book as well, several books actually.
She has a
Yeah,
few.
she
Yeah.
has several books. She's still alive, correct?
You know what? Unfortunately, I don't. I'm not. You know what? I don't think I'm not one of those people that look at like the death dates and stuff of people.
Hmm.
I'm never really that person.
I'm
But
just curious because she's kind of, if that was the case, she is kind of like a living legend. I want to look it up right now. Doreen Valiente.
I know Maxine Saunders is still with us.
Mhm. Doreen Valiente. Is this right? 1999? I don't know if this is her. Oh, she died at 77 in 99.
Mm.
Yeah. Still though, um, dying in 99 and it's only, 2018. I mean, she's a modern day legend. She's a modern day myth. But anyway, so back to Gardner. So he's initiated into this coven of female witches, right? And then he basically takes their craft, their religion, and
And brings it
puts
to the
his own
public.
and brings it to the public and puts his own spin on it too.
Well,
Because I
because
think he
he brought it.
introduced like the scourging and stuff, right? Didn't he
He may
introduce that?
have. He may have. I don't know.
I don't know. I think he added some things to it. And then Doreen comes into the picture, but she was actually the brains behind a lot of stuff
Well, she was
that
very
their
smart.
company did. She was incredibly intelligent and an amazing occultist and a very powerful witch.
Um, I think he got a lot of notoriety in large part because at the time witchcraft was still illegal in England,
Yes.
and when he brought it public, it basically paved the way for witchcraft and Wicca to become legalized. And then, of course, over time, come the Summer of Love, it came over here.
Mhm.
So during the 70s.
Mhm. But yeah, I just think it's interesting that a lot of the brains behind the Wicca movement and like the history behind it is a lot of women.
It
A lot of
is.
very powerful women, and yet he's the one that is the poster child of it.
Well, we always have to kind of remind people, I find, of Starhawk and
Starhawk, another living legend.
Starhawk and oh oh man.
I don't like to mention her name, but Z Budapest did do a lot
I
in
was
the
gonna
beginning.
totally avoid that name.
I'm
I wasn't
sorry.
mentioning it.
We don't like her because she's a TERF, but she did have a hand in a lot of the. I think her and Starhawk are friends or
They
something,
were.
right? They were. Yeah.
There's also other names too that we don't that aren't as popular, but should Lady Olivia Robertson.
Mhm.
She was the Temple of Isis in England. I think they were called or Temple of the Goddess, something like that. She's really cool. Um, oh, I could see. I feel so bad. There's
Mhm.
another famous witch. She's still with us to this day, and she's a living legend. And I follow her on Instagram. She does these amazing like little videos, like all in rhyme, and it's adorable. And I love her videos. They just make me so
The
happy.
gray-haired lady,
Yes,
long gray hair, kind of heavy set.
yes.
God damn, what is her name? I gotta look it up because I see her all over.
She
Because she
makes me.
was one of Starhawk's crew, wasn't she?
Yeah, she was. Her and Starhawk are still friends.
Well,
If
that's
I'm
so
not
funny. I opened Instagram and Starhawk's Instagram post is the first thing that's on here.
mistaken.
That's funny. Oh my god, I can't think of her name. I'm just gonna
Serena
scroll into
Fox.
Serena Fox. Yes. Thank God. She's so awesome. Like
I
she has
know.
like a pop in Instagram. Byron Ballard.
Byron Ballard.
She
Lori Cabot. We
Laurie
gotta go
Cabot.
there.
You
We gotta
can't
go there.
can't ignore her. Um
Even if you want to.
what's really interesting, I don't wanna nothing is set in stone, so this is not an official Philly Pagan Pride Day announcement. It's not set in stone. However, there is a very strong chance that we could get Laura Tempest Zakroff. Is it Zakroff or Zakroff? I'm not sure how you
I
pronounce her
think
last name.
I thought it was
Zakroff.
Zarkov. I thought it was Zarkov.
I'm looking at her book right now. It's Zakroff. Zakroff or Zarkov.
Oh,
Laura Tempest. Let's just go with Laura. Laura Tempest. There is a chance that she could be our keynote. Which I would no shade at Chris Penzak. Is that how you pronounce his last name? Penzak. He was also another possibility that Eddie was working on, but I think it would be way cooler to have a woman. You know what I mean? Like Chris, he's popular. You know what I mean? Like
yeah, yeah. I get
he's
what you're saying.
yeah.
Either one of those, though, I will be super stoked. But that's just a personal thing.
Oh
But
yeah, yeah,
I totally yeah, I totally feel what you're saying.
yeah,
That would be really cool.
yeah.
Just to be able to
Nothing is set in
see
stone
that.
then, so it's
I
it's
know
not
it
an
would just
official.
be cool. But seriously.
Yeah, fingers crossed.
um,
Um, so I think. it's kind of like a hard issue to tackle because it's not something that's very apparent. Because the problem is you can't call someone out. You can. So let me back up. You can call someone out on their misogyny. However, if they refuse to acknowledge that it exists, how do you battle it?
Yep.
How do
Yep.
you argue with someone? How do you tackle something? How do you fix something that someone doesn't see a problem with? You know what I'm saying?
Right. Right.
It's like if you're staring at a hole in the wall and you're like, "Hey, let's fix that hole in the wall," and someone's like, "I don't see what you're talking about." You know, it's a big problem. How do you fix something that no one understands that they're actually doing? Um, and so I think that's really the biggest question on misogyny is how do we combat it, right? Well, I think really the bigger question is how do we get people to see what it is? How do we get people to see what it is that they're doing? And then when it's just been ingrained in you as a I guess a straight passing white man, right? Let's just put it that way. You know, when it's been ingrained in you is you start to develop almost like a sense of entitlement that everyone around you is just supposed to just listen to you and
And
based on your
think like
authority
you and
and
act
think
like
like you.
you,
Hmm.
like what you like.
Yeah, like I'm encountering it now because the more that I pass, the more that I interact with other men that look like me, right? Other white men. And I think for the most part people might read me as straight depending on the situation. Um but when I talk to these other men and I don't share their viewpoints,
Mhm.
that's a problem.
Yeah.
I'm different. It's unusual, it's weird, and it's well, you know, why this, why that, and I just feel like it's becoming a little bit more difficult for me to really kind of like hold my place as like I don't want to say difficult. I think it's more important for me to solidify my place as a witch, as a male witch in this community because I realized at Delmarva Pagan Pride, so like Chris and Tara were there, right? And they were doing it was a Tara's workshop on flying ointment, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I was." She's like, "Jay, like you're here," and I was like, "Oh my God, you remember me? You know who I am?" You know, like, "Oh, you know, you're Jay with Philly Pagan Pride," and I was like, "Oh shit." And I'm starting to realize like other people are starting to know who I am, and what's really interesting for me is I'm so used to taking on like a support role in a lot of groups. And even if I'm leading a group, quote unquote, I still do it very group think, group effort kind of
Yeah.
way. Like even when we ran our coven, I was still very like
Democratically, I think would be.
democratic. Yeah. Because I don't like I like to direct, but I don't like to rule with an iron fist. So what's interesting is like people in the Philly Pagan Pride group are looking to me for direction and I'm realizing I'm like, "Oh my God, everything that I do can be done. Everything that I say can be done." And it's a weird sense and I'm respectful of that position. I'm respectful of the
Mhm.
position that I'm in. I'm not like, "Oh, well everyone's just going to do everything for me," you know, because I'm the president and everyone has to do everything else. You know, it's I don't know, it's a weird position to be in because I've never been in a true position of like authority and respect, I guess you could say. This is the first time I'm in that. And people are starting to people outside of that group are starting to realize who I am and also treat me with that same amount of authority and respect.
Mhm.
And I don't want it to, and I know me, it won't go to my head, but I just don't want other people to think like, "Oh, here we go, another white guy, you know, just fucking leading another
Yeah.
magic group." You know what I mean? I don't want it to be like that. I want
Mhm.
people to understand like I'm a witch, I'm a trans man, like don't come at me. I know exactly we're all in the same boat here. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. I get it. I mean, I get it. I understand. I mean, I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there. It's funny because I've never had. It's kind of a weird. I guess there's really just no absolutes because it's one of those situations where my femininity and my queerness have always been very obvious to other people,
Right.
and I can't say that I've gotten anywhere because I was a man.
Mm-hmm.
I've gotten further because I'm a nice person,
Mm-hmm.
but that is also not given me. Like at the same time, it
It's
depends on who
fucked
the
you
other
sometimes.
person. Yeah,
Uh-huh.
because they like there are sometimes you have like predominantly women who are kind of like, oh, you're such a sweetheart, blah blah blah, and they kind of gush over me.
Mm-hmm.
And then there are these kind of on the other side you have like these kind of men who get somehow intimidated or they feel confronted by my femininity without me even trying to make them feel weird, and
Probably
all of a sudden they
because
refuse me into a space or into a situation.
true, but I think part of that is they are jealous and threatened by your ability to communicate with women on a level that they can't.
I've thought that as well because I've had many of straight men who are actually very polite, who kind of and I remember this is in high school, obviously. You'll tell because they would be like, "Can you talk to this girl for me?" Like and I'd be like, and of course at the time I was a yes man, so sure I'll do it.
Right.
Um, and I mean I never like talked them up. I always like I would tell the guys like I'm not gonna like bullshit them, like I'm gonna say, look, he feels this way, he's scared. I said, and of course me being emotionally intelligent, I was always kind of like we're young and he's scared and blah blah blah. You can't hold him to the same standards as like an adult, man. His brain is,
Mhm.
and I would go that route and I would just try to say, like, look, he likes you. You
Mhm.
know, if you want to talk to him, do. If you don't, it ain't no biggie. And I would leave it
Right.
at that. Um, and of course some of the guys were like, why would you say that? And I was like, well, it's true.
Because it's true, if she doesn't want to talk to you, then she doesn't have to, and she's not
Right.
she's
And I
not
would say
obligated
that.
to.
And I
Yeah.
would say that to them. The women I would say that to. I mean, I would say it to him too, but after the fact. You know what I mean? So,
I just find it interesting because like all the men at work, they're just very. I can't click. I can't connect. I can't. I don't understand. I just they're almost too simple for me. I can't see. I
I
can't
get
see.
that. And
I
and
can't
I
see the
feel,
complexity of their character. I'm sure they have personalities. I'm
of
sure they do.
course,
There's a lot of layers to get through.
of
And
course.
so most of the people that I connect with at work are all the women. And all the women love me in turn. They're like, "Oh, you're so great. You listen to me." And I'm like, "Yeah, because I know how to be a nice person."
Right.
And I'm
Without
sure
expectation.
exactly. And I'm sure like I was actually me and my coworker were out. There's like a little yard outside. And we were like, you know what, let's go have lunch outside today. Let's just get out of this office for like 20 minutes and we'll go eat outside. So that's what we did. And I was like, I bet there's like people in this office like, oh, why is Jay chatting you up? Like, was he trying to like do
Yeah.
whatever? I'm like, I'm sure there are gossipy people because I'm so close with the women. They probably think I'm like some fucking player. You know what I mean? Like, no, I
Yeah.
just have way better conversations with women than I ever would with any of you guys in here. I couldn't imagine it. I really couldn't imagine it. Like with the guys, it's just like, hey, what's up? And I'm like, hey, what's up? And that's it. It doesn't go any further.
And now obviously I'm not talking about all straight men. I have like I have many of straight cis male friends who have wives or girlfriends, and I want to tell you something. They're some of the most they've protected me throughout my coming out process
Mhm.
the whole way. Um, and they would never have betrayed me for any like for that reason ever.
Mhm.
They were always very comfortable in themselves, and the thing is that with the they're all of those men are very what would be what other men very undereducated men would call like beta male or something stupid to that effect.
Mhm.
because a lot of my straight male friends, they're nerdy, they're highly intelligent, like like my one friend, he's a bit of a savant.
Mm-hmm.
He's just ridiculously smart.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
But that's not seen as an alpha male
right, because
quality.
he's not macho. He doesn't like sports. He'd rather read a book than he
And
doesn't watch
watch the Phillies
football,
game.
and
Yeah.
he doesn't do any of that. So he does what everyone thinks a gay man would do.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
Like his interests seem passive or they seem feminine, like mine do. Which also irks me because I'm kind of like, no offense, others, undereducated straight men, but like the gay sport is rugby, and I don't
Honestly,
know if
yeah.
they know
It's the
any.
most
I
brutal
like,
sport out. One of the most brutal sports out there.
and I was like, if like I've watched videos, like I mean, and I've almost puked. Like it's like gay rugby players. They're
Mm-hmm.
like they'll get tackled and like their arms like the other way, and they're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, tis but a flesh wound, and they're like laughing with their. I'm like,
Yeah.
they're warriors, man, and they're gay men. Like I just watched a preview for the gay rodeo.
Mm.
The one guy, he's all bleeding and like like the like his arms all whatever, and like he was like fine, like he just and I was like, I don't know. I
You
guess
know what I was thinking? I think the problem is.
what?
I think the problem with misogyny is that the men that don't subscribe to the alpha male archetype, right, aren't vocal enough uh, to the men that are the problem.
Mm. See, it's funny because I've been you know me. I'm on a lot of different groups,
Oh yeah,
and
you're
unfortunately,
everywhere.
I've seen a lot of men attack other men for things, and the men that they view as lesser than themselves have attacked back. The problem is that once again, misogyny, as we have been saying, is about dominance.
Hmm.
And the thing is that all of a sudden those men start coming out with the harmful phrases like beta male. They come out with fag, and
Hmm.
they use like sissy or
Hmm.
even queer,
Hmm.
which sorry, that don't hurt me.
Yeah,
Um,
that one bounces right off.
uh, fag can hurt more depending.
Fag can hurt more because I think it comes from a place of aggression and
Yeah,
violence.
but that one doesn't always hit me as hard as it does in other times.
Hmm.
Like I've been called it and I've laughed, and then I've been called it and I want to rip someone's face off. Like it really depends on
It
my mood
depends on the
sometimes.
delivery, the person who's saying it.
Yeah, yeah. Um, but I mean, otherwise, I don't know. I mean, I've seen them fight back, but they're not listened to.
Right, because the problem is they're viewed on the same level as women. But you know what's interesting because you were saying about your friend who like prefers like reading and stuff like that to working out or sports. So a lot of these armchair fucking magicians, right? These armchair sorcerers, they're also not the most macho people. Generally.
Generally.
Generally they're very bookish, you know. They could be considered like somewhere in that like nerd kind of category.
Yeah. They.
Um, Go ahead.
It's funny because there are many of them. If you really like, if you look into like the ceremonial systems of magic, like
Mm,
Christian magic, Solomonic magic, like the people that, or even a lot, not all. I'm not coming at the Luciferian community at all, but a lot of
mm,
Luciferian men, they kind of have a swagger that's a bit toxic, but a bit different from. Like even my friend Richie, the person I'm talking about, he won't. It doesn't even matter. He won't care. He practices predominantly ceremonial magic,
mhm.
predominantly. Um, so even he kind of breaks this mold. He doesn't like many male ceremonial magicians. Like one thing I found out about many straight ceremonial magicians, they have this tactic that they use. They use their clothing as a not just as a power of stasis. You'll notice many ceremonial magicians, not all, but many, they dress to the nines frequently.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And it's actually more than just an act of I own my space. It actually is, for them, it becomes an act of attraction magic, not just to attract a partner or a sexual partner. It also is just to attract the opportunities that they want. So they kind of use that phrase, dress for the job you want, and they make it like a ritual. So their dress becomes like an active ceremony. Their garb, their everyday garb, becomes an active ceremony. You'll notice that these men tend to be much better groomed than myself. They tend to be, make sure that they look particularly handsome. And it's because they use these kind of psycho-spirituals, almost hypnosis. They use these kind of psycho-spiritual ceremonies to bolster themselves and the perception that people view them.
Do you think they could be bolstered but I think some of them just take it to the next level.
Well, that's what I'm
I
trying
think
to
they
get at.
get bolstered into overconfidence, and then when you're overconfident, then you end up talking down to everyone around you.
And that's exactly what I was trying to get at. I don't know, and before, and I still think it's fascinating, obviously, as I was talking about it, you can probably tell, but that isn't to say that I don't think it's not a gateway to toxicity. To, you know what I'm saying? Like, I think when left unchecked, if you refuse to acknowledge, your crap, if you refuse to acknowledge your shit, there's nothing, no one could tell you anything about it. We can't, it's too hard to confront someone's worldview. And the problem is that, believe it or not, misogyny is a worldview. It is a way that you perceive the society around you, and it's a system of power that you've just born into. And poof, look at all the power I have. And you cannot, to confront that means that they themselves have to confront back, like reflect back upon themselves. And to look at yourself like that in a metaphoric mirror is too hard for most people. Confronting anyone's worldview will be met with confrontation back at you for confronting them. And that's science. That's not even me trying to come at anybody. That's just me telling you what science says.
Well, yeah, because my worldview is that I think everyone should respect each other, right? Well, if someone came at me and was like, no one has to respect you, no one has to, treat you nice, and I'd be like, well, I completely will fight to the death to disagree with you on that, because that's my worldview. Unfortunately, I hate by saying that. It's like, by saying misogyny is a worldview, it's almost like I don't want anyone to interpret that as like we're giving them agency to. It's almost like when
it's
people
not, but the thing is,
protest,
right?
When people protest and they're throwing out hate speech, okay, freedom of speech. This is what everyone goes back to. Yes, you have freedom of speech, but also there's repercussions to the shit that you say.
Right. And the thing is that nothing that I like, when I talk about the psychology like that, when I go into the psychology and the sociology of things, it is not to give agency. It is not to give permission. It is to tell you this is how it is.
To explain human behavior.
Right. It's not about whether it's right or wrong when I'm talking about it in that way. It's just to tell you. Now, is it wrong? Absolutely, because it hurts people.
Yes.
See what I'm saying? So see, that's at the base of psychology, at its very foundation. People, when it's time for psychology to interfere in something, is when it starts to lower the quality of life. So when people or persons are dealing with something, whether on a sociological scale or on just a personal one, if their general life is being affected poorly by it, that's when there's a problem. So it is a problem, they're not shielded by the fact that science has studied the intricacies of misogyny and bigotry. It's just the fact that, okay, now that we know this, where do we go from here?
Yeah,
how do we correct an incorrect, thinking in a large number of people?
Right, because it's hurting people and it's oppressing people and it's not helping anyone further themselves. I've never heard of a situation, well, other than men, I've never heard of a situation in which misogyny helps everyone, in which it helps society as a whole.
Right.
It just keeps a very large and very important group of people oppressed. And the thing that I find most interesting is a lot of these people tend to people that are very strong, very open, I guess you could say. I don't think anyone would ever just say straight up, I'm a misogynist, because that's just not what people really say.
Yeah.
But people who are usually they're more like conservative, maybe along the lines of you know, I don't care about gay people, I don't care about trans people, blah blah blah. These are the people that are very vocal. They're very vocal about the things that they feel. Um, like the weirdest thing happened earlier. I was on Twitter and I follow a lot of like furry writers, and this one guy, it's just weird because I think he's gay. He's a
Hmm.
white guy. I think he's gay. And he writes primarily like erotica, right? And so I saw he posted on his Twitter like, "Oh, changed up my profile. Unfollow if you want." And I was like, "All right, well now I have to see, what you wrote." And he wrote in his like, Twitter like has this little like, "Oh, so and so YouTuber, writer, whatever." This little blurb you can write about yourself. He wrote something 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 bullshit whatever, and then he wrote real man. And I was like, I need to stop you there. What do you mean? Like
Right. Right.
what are you trying to say?
I have, and
What are you
coming,
trying to compensate for? Why do you feel the need to write that on there? Like, are you just love drawing a line in the sand like that, or do you get off on that? Like, does that make you feel good about yourself? And then it just brings me back to like the straight pride people, which is 100% rooted in misogyny, most definitely. It's not even just homophobia; it's just rooted in misogyny
well,
and
homophobia is
is
home
rooted
as
in,
misogyny.
yeah, that's
It's
just parent um parent brand of bullshit. Um I can't I mean, I guess in a way I could imagine like with this world being very like, oh, everything's it's okay to be gay, it's okay to be queer, it's okay to be trans, it's okay to be all these things. And I guess for someone to have an opposing viewpoint and to hearing more voices say it's okay to be blah, but when you're not blah, or they're like, oh, well, there's nothing special about being gay, there's nothing special about being trans.
what is that quote about? Equality feels like oppression if you've never if you've never been oppressed.
Something like that. I think that's how it goes. But what's interesting is Rick, he was in another, like, when it was like furry group chats or whatever. And the thing about the furry community, I kind of equate them to the queer community because most of them are queer. Most of them are, it's actually like predominantly gay men. So most of them are queer. So any furry chat is to me a queer chat situation. So there was a trans person that shared a tweet from some other trans person or something saying, you're not special if you're trans. There's nothing to be. You don't celebrate being gay because it doesn't fucking mean anything. Like, you're just a person. I don't celebrate being a human. So if you deconstruct it, okay, great. Yeah, there really is nothing quote unquote special about being gay. There's nothing
But that's
quote
not what
unquote
we're
special.
celebrating.
Right. That's not what we're celebrating. The problem is that when you're oppressed and you encounter hardships for being that thing, then yeah, you are special
Right.
because no one's treating it as the norm.
Right. I keep, unfortunately, and I'm not trying to bring down the mood at all, but like, I unfortunately, I've been keeping an unhealthy track of how many of the increasing LGBTQ attacks that are happening, not just here in the States, but around the world.
Mhm.
And we just had another gay couple severely beaten 3 hours away in Washington, D.C., no less. And it like, I don't know, it broke me a little.
I'm getting past the point of like sometimes I would read those articles and I'd be like, oh man, that sucks, and I would kind of move on. And then I would, as I got older, I would be like, man, that really is a terrible thing, and I would think about it more, and then I move on. And then I get to the point where I would get like really upset, and I'm like, that's just horrible. Like I can't imagine that happening to me or someone I know. And now I've kind of just
Do you get
moved to the
angry?
yeah, now I've moved to anger. Now
Yeah,
I've
me
moved to the
too.
part where I'm very ragey. Normally I
Yep.
don't really care about politics. I don't care about um I don't know, I guess just like inserting my magic and my will into that sphere
Hmm.
of society, but now I'm just angry.
I'm
I'm
angry too.
just I'm
I
just
it's
and I
yeah.
know I say this with a very like low voice. I'm tired, I worked all day, but I'm angry. I'm pissed off, and it's just such it shouldn't be a regular occurrence. We shouldn't see increasing attacks. We shouldn't see increasing negativity regarding these communities. We shouldn't see that. And I'm incredibly angry, and I just feel and then with all of these abortion things that are coming out, it's 100% designed anti-women.
Hmm.
It's not pro-birth, it's not pro-life, it's just anti-women.
Yeah, you're right.
And I can't imagine why. What do they gain? I don't know. Like,
Power,
I'm
control,
power and control, yeah, but at the expense of what? Like, I don't
ego.
know.
They
I don't
just
know
they
what they
just
gain by like forcing women to have these babies that no one can afford.
look at the power that I have. It's just about if you ask me, it's just to say that look at what I can do. Look at me, look at me, look at me. They want to be noticed for some reason. These straight cis men want they want to be able to control everything that isn't them. And they should be able, like they it's funny because I learned something recently. I started watching The Handmaid's Tale again.
Oh my God, I'm caught up, and it's a terrible place to be.
Uh
I
I
watched
mean,
that. When I first started watching that show, I had to stop. I watched the
I
first
did too.
episode, and I was like,
I watched the first season and I stopped.
yeah, I watched the first, I think like one or two episodes, and I was like, I need to like really sit here and think about if I really want to continue watching this show. Like, I really need to think about it, and I had to like talk to myself and be like, okay, look, it's just a show. However, it deals with a lot of real things that could possibly happen.
Now I'm gonna say something to you that I learned last night from the author of the original book.
Yeah, and she's writing
Margot
a
Mar
sequel, by the way.
is she? I'm not
Yeah.
surprised. Margot Atwood. She and the directors for the show, they
Yes.
both collaborated. Everything that happened in both the book and the show has happened in real life at some point in history,
Mm.
somewhere around the world. So nothing that happens in that show is fiction. Like it's all actually happened.
Well, like the whole like women being like
It,
birth machines and
it's all historically actually happened somewhere in the world at some point in history.
yeah, because the whole system of like the whole idea of the handmaids and the ceremony and all this kind of shit. Like that
Ritualized
whole
rape.
yeah, that whole idea of that it seems very ancient, not ancient, maybe like it seems very medieval. It feels very medieval.
I mean, she didn't say like, she didn't like break it down. No one broke it down,
Yeah.
but
But it
basically
feels like an
it
old
blew my
tradition that
mind.
might have happened. Like someone was like, "Wow, this is a great idea." It seems like someone back then and
Yeah,
yeah,
it blew my
it
mind
feels
to
like that.
know that all of that at different points in time were something that actually occurred.
Maybe that's why the show is so disturbing.
I think that that's why. I think because there's something so, and I hate to use this word because it's not going to be used in the way that we normally use this word, but there's something so human about the violence, as
Yes.
in to say something that like we know what we're capable of
Hmm.
as far as our great destructive power.
Mhm.
and all the harm that we have caused and continue to cause. And you look at that and you see it embodied, in screen. And, you know, it's interesting because as we say here, it really almost starts to look as if like, almost the greatest devil of them all is this misogyny. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Honestly, because it seems like that everything is rooted in that. Like we were saying, like homophobia is rooted in misogyny. It's rooted in this idea that women are lesser, and I can't understand why or how. Because when I was in college, I took a gender studies class. Granted, I went to a Catholic university, and this was the only gender studies class that was available in this university, and I took it. And the teacher was actually very liberal, very progressive. So I was very grateful for that I didn't get it through a Catholic lens, which was surprising too. I thought I was going to get this very like watered down version of equality.
yeah.
Um, but so one of our first topics, like one of the first day was okay. Of course, we all know it. Why? And it was taught by a woman, a black woman actually. And so she was like, "Why do you think that women are viewed as the weaker sex?" And that was just like the first question, but that was pretty much the basis of the whole class if you really think about it, you know? And everyone was coming up with all these different answers. Well, women are usually smaller than men. Women are usually just generally weaker, in strength than men. Because of hunter gatherers, women were the gatherers and men were the hunters, and so gathering was viewed as weaker, as lesser. And really, like, no one came up with a good answer.
Well,
None of the answers
interestingly,
were good.
no. Well, they won't be, especially not the one about women are biologically weaker or a little bit weaker. There's actually no actual real biological evidence. There are differences. However, women are considerably faster at running, and they are more acrobatic, more capable of like flips and jumps and
Hmm.
acrobatic exercise than men. Men are better maybe at and also they're better at overpowering martial arts, like not martial arts that are about size, but martial arts that are about speed and hitting more and in
Speed
the
and like
correct
center of
position.
gravity.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Uh, so realistically, it's not about one stronger than the other or one faster than the other. Because if you really wanted to play that, we can go on forever. Just
Yeah.
because there are women bodybuilding competitions, and those women are like moving the same kind of cars that men are. You
Yeah,
know
I
what I'm
mean, some of
saying?
these women can come out there and pick you up and throw them over their shoulder. You know what I mean? Throw them over
Mhm.
their shoulder and run around like it's nobody's business.
So I mean, obviously those things are obviously wrong. You know what I mean? On an obvious
Yeah,
level, but also on
there's
a
just no
scientific one.
logic.
Right? There's not, and there's no basis for it either.
Hmm.
Maybe there once was, because unfortunately a lot of science back in the old days was also very racist, homophobic, and anti-woman.
Yeah.
Um, but uh,
And I feel like women have just a generally higher pain tolerance too. Like a pain.
that is accurate. A lot of women do have a higher pain tolerance. Interestingly enough, we also find that trans women will also have the same um,
Pain
markers for that
tolerance.
same, yeah, as cisgendered women.
Because it's psychological.
Yeah, the
It's
pain
the way your
centers in the
brain's
brain
wired.
and the way the brain also looks. We do know now that the brain of trans people
More,
predominantly looks
yeah,
more like the gender that which they are telling, which they know they are, not the one that they were. Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
assigned.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Um, so I mean, this whole debacle it's not scientific. Um, I was just there's this book that I really want to get that's just I just posted the article on my Facebook. It's called The Darkening Age:
Hmm.
How Christianity Destroyed the Ancient World.
Whoa.
Um, and it sounds harsh, but
Yeah.
the thing is that it
It
did.
did from a historical context. I'm not even talking about religion. I'm not even talking about.
No, I'm not. I'm
I'm not even
talking
talking about.
about.
I'm just the Christian, I guess, movement.
Mhm.
Of the convert or die kind of
Yeah, yeah.
thing.
I mean,
Um,
and the way that they enforce their very old their other at the time new theology.
right, and then also the absorption of pagan customs, and then kind of like giving it a Christian flavor,
Right.
So really, it's just a lot of you just erased and absorbed a lot of cultures and a lot of history.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because I'm not going to sit here and say that, ancient pagans were, classy or bougie in any way. Like
No,
they
God
were
no.
barbaric and we know for a fact, and I know like a lot of modern druids don't like to admit to this, but we all gotta. If a tradcrafter can admit that witches were over here splitting toads with an axe and dipping live animals and then boiling oil to get bones and shit, you can admit to this. There is a druidic ritual in which the druids believe they can turn the Roman gods against their people
Hmm.
by sacrificing a village of people.
Oh yeah, human sacrifice was totally a thing.
But the particular ritual was to kill a whole village, and it would in turn through a series of rituals and practices would turn the Roman gods against the Roman people. So the gods would look unfavorably and smite their own people. Um, but what I am trying, I think what is implied, and I can see this on a theological standpoint. I think that pagan people were even then more willing to evolve
Hmm.
with time than I think Christians were.
Hmm.
Because at that time, even paganism looked different than what it looks like today.
Oh God, yeah, it was way
I mean,
different.
like that's why I try to preach, even on here, I talk about animism first.
Hmm.
But way before my polytheism, I'm like animism first,
Hmm.
like the things that are here with you in the landscape, in the hills and in the trees and in the natural bodies of water, you
Hmm.
know. Um, and each hill and mountain had a god named to it, or a goddess, the Calyx bear, Calyx bear,
Hmm.
which is a mountain. And there are many other deities with wells, uh, Breed or Bridget wells and things like that. So it was about the landscape, it was about where you are, not to quote unintentionally anyway, Kristen Tyler's book. um
Hmm.
but and that was what paganism was founded on. And the thing is that people like to say that animism is like monotheism or Hellion theism, which is the belief that the Christian God, although there are many gods, but the Christian God was above them all. That's called Hellion theism, I
Hmm.
believe that's how it's pronounced. Um, and then there were other theisms, but believe it or not, animism is not a theistic idea about the nature of God or gods. Animism is a
No.
world. It's a worldview. It's a way that we look at the world because you
Hmm.
interact with animism in a way that you don't interact per se with with deity, because it's kind of about, well, let me leave that space alone. Let me in Shintoism, they set the sacred rope with the rice paper that
Hmm.
looks like little thunderbolts. I forget the Japanese names, unfortunately, but even that is a marker to show it's an othered place or an othered object.
The interesting thing with animism is sex and gender have no place in there.
They get
It's
Yeah, it's
it's
wild.
really
That's why it
yeah,
gets
like
wild.
it doesn't matter. Like it's just the spirit of this thing, the spirit of this place, the spirit of this whatever this is.
And it's funny because I mean, at times they would use gender, but it wasn't important. It wasn't what
It didn't affect the
was.
power of that thing, assigning it a gender.
Yeah, it didn't really mean anything, really. I mean, and of course, which is funny for someone like me who has issues understanding gender.
Mhm.
Um, and I'm realizing that more and more, not even less and less.
Mhm.
Like since I've talked about non-binary and agender stuff, I'm like realizing more and more that I think it's more not necessarily non-binary, but more agender.
Mhm.
Because I don't get it. I still don't get it. But of course, I also understand that that's not everyone's situation.
Mhm.
Um, but so even that for me, I think that's why I've always loved these anthropomorphized gods. Like even the horned god of witches. Witch,
The Witch
king
King
of,
and the Witch
yeah.
Queen.
I love that idea. One of my favorite prayers to the Witch King is um, divine androgyne, they call him. I
Yeah,
know I
I
say
like
that
that
a
a
lot,
lot.
but I've always enjoyed that. Because just because you call him the divine androgyne, and somehow it completely cancels out gender altogether for me,
Hmm.
at least in my mind. And I just see him as this goat like anthropomorphized being.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I almost like seem to identify with that better. But I don't know. I like I said anyway. To get back to it, I think ancient pagans would have been more able to evolve. And when I say ancient pagans, I also do want to say that I mean ancient traditional religions from all over the world would have been much easier. They would have been much more open to the idea of evolution or evolving as a people, societally, than I
Hmm.
think the Christians have ever been. The Christians are afraid to do, like, I don't like. We never had scripture. We don't have, um, even though our gods have had many stories in which they come to Earth in one form or another. Many times, male deities coming as females. Many times, females coming as animals, or male deities coming as animals, or even beings that are not gendered.
Hmm.
Um, uh, I don't know. I just think, without the lack of scripture, without the lack of at least now, hierarchy. Ancient pagans did have hierarchies, but like priestly orders and stuff. But I still think that we would have been able to advance. That book is something that I want to read. But I really do think too, to get back into this too, I do believe that in a lot of ways, the Christian takeover, when all of that happened, with the Saxon hordes in Europe, and the uprising of the Roman Empire,
Hmm.
um, that really did something, because when you look at stories pre-conversion, of around Europe and other parts of the world,
There
there
was
like
less division between man and woman.
also there was more recognition of women.
Hmm.
On a divine level, we had Inanna, who was said to be, one of the older a Mesopotamian Canaan
Well, I
goddess.
mean, look at the messages of the Christian Bible. You know what I mean? Women are often they're painted in a not as bright of a light as
Yeah,
the
I
male.
think I always
I,
said
I'll
that.
just say characters because they are stories, but as the male characters
Yeah.
in that book, Mary was the mother of Jesus, and yet, I mean, yeah, she's a figure, but you know what I mean? It's just like I just feel she doesn't get enough credit. She doesn't
Well,
get
I
enough,
mean, it's
you
funny,
know.
right? Because
Or Eve
and
was the one who ate the apple. Like
right.
she's the bad one. It's just
Yeah, yeah. And
easily
even
swayed.
with like with the Blessed Mother, who I actually, believe it or not, still work with in my practice. Um, but she, known as the Queen of Heaven,
Hmm.
in the Catholic faith, and yet still, when you say that, like, well, that's not what that means. And I'm like,
Right,
well, what does it mean if she's not like the female like goddess, right? Like,
right, exactly. Like she's vice president of heaven. I don't
yeah,
know.
actually, yes, that's pretty
Yeah,
much exactly what it's like. She's not exactly that. Like, just
yeah,
because she's the queen, she's suddenly still less than.
right. I don't know. It's incredibly frustrating, but I do think you might be onto something, especially in the case of
Historical
modern
context.
society, in a historical context, and with these magic groups. But what's interesting is if in these magic groups, if we're gonna get so esoteric and really dig into the roots of where all this magic comes from, I don't even know why people are worrying about women versus men, and you know what I mean? Like, oh well, you're just a woman, so blah blah blah. I don't even know why that is even a topic of conversation in a lot of these magic groups.
I really
I
think
have no idea.
it's because a lot of people spend way too much time reading about magic instead of doing magic. And while, don't get me wrong, I have that curse too, but I have other reasons for doing that.
I
Not that they're
I would venture to say of all the armchair sorcerers that
Mm-hmm.
I've met. And what I mean by that is, in case anyone's not familiar with the term, is that I read about magic and I know a lot of stuff, but I don't actually do magic. I just sit in my chair and read about it. I have never met a female armchair sorcerer.
I haven't either.
So
I haven't either. I really haven't.
just
Um,
let that sink in, you know?
it's very true. I think that, yeah, that, oh my God, every armchair magician I've ever met is a man.
You know, it's funny.
Holy
Sophia's
shit.
Sophia might be mad at me for this, but it's fine. When I first met Sophia and I first started talking to Sophia, and Sophia was like, "Oh, chaos magic," and there's like all the stuff that she's into. I had a hunch for a minute that she might be one of like I was like, this might be my first female armchair sorcerer that I've ever met. And then we started talking more, and she proved me wrong. So I was very, very, very happy about that. Um, and I don't know if she thought the same of me. I have no idea. But yes. So thank you, Sophia, for proving me wrong that female armchair sorcerers don't exist. So they just don't exist. And to me there is no worse kind of sorcerer than the armchair kind, the ones that don't do the work.
Yeah.
There's no worse type to me. You immediately lose my respect. I don't want to associate with you. I would rather talk to someone who summons demons on the regs, just for funsies, than to someone who just is like, well, I read about it. Well, according to this theory, I can't relate. Can't relate at all.
See, you see how I said like they want they want your papers, right? They want
Right.
you to tell them. They want you to
Like
prove in the
I wrote a
sense of like,
book and I did
right.
this and
These are
I
my
summoned.
20 initiations.
Hmm.
But here's the thing. I want to know. I want to see you do like I want to see you do the work. Like a friend of mine who is also an ex of mine. I haven't talked to him in a long time, but
I wonder if you challenged these people. Like, okay, show me.
no, I mean, I wouldn't because it's just not who I am. But he like for instance, like one time he was like, I really want to try this thing. I've never did a ritual in this way. He was
Hmm.
Luciferian, so his magic was a little bit different than a stereotypical ceremonial summoning. It was a little bit different. But
Hmm.
he wanted to do the whole like chalk circle on the ground with
Hmm.
the seal and stuff. And I was like, cool, I've never done this either. So like let's go.
Hmm.
And when I tell you the atmosphere. He did his thing and he started doing it, and boom, you knew it was like
Hmm.
something like coming up, and I was like, holy shit.
Hmm.
But that's what I'm talking. See, that gets my respect. I mean,
Right, when you
I don't,
actually do what you
right
say that you can do.
now, I don't care that I like even if I didn't feel anything. That's not what got my respect. I mean, it helped. I mean, because just like
Yeah.
holy shit, wow. But the thing is, I want to see you doing the work. I
Hmm.
don't care. Like, there are many times magic is a personal experience anyway, even when you're working with people. There are many times where people, even when we were in a coven, we would experience
Hmm.
distinctly different things, but we were all doing the same ritual with the same intention.
Hmm.
So, I mean, I don't really care so much if I did or didn't feel it, but to see him take control of that ceremony and know what to do and know what to say and when to do this and when to do that, that was impressive.
Hmm.
You see what I'm saying? I don't need to know your papers. I don't need to know your initiations, especially because I happen to know, by the way, many people that have countless number of initiations, they what they do is they initiation hop. So they just make acquaintances, make friends, get
Get
initiated.
initiated and bounce. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So it's all a crock of shit. Like they hardly spend any time. Like they'll learn about it. Like they like yeah. It's a crock of shit 9 times out of 10.
Hmm.
Um, most people with real initiations will have like three, maybe sometimes
Three's
maybe
a good
four.
number. Three's usually always 3 or 4.
Yeah.
Sometimes 5 on the high end, but any more than 5 is a bit like, okay, I
It
see.
starts to make me squint.
Yeah, you're like, hmm.
But generally speaking, it's like two or three.
Hmm.
Most people, even like the big authors, they have about like two or three initiations.
Which they
Um,
keep up with.
huh?
Which they generally keep up with.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
do. they actively participate in all of the traditions in which they're initiated in.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I mean, and that's that. All of that was unfortunately all. I think we went a lot with the magic. As
Well,
far
I mean, we did talk about the queer community, because we were talking about it earlier, and a lot of times the two communities do overlap, which is kind of the whole point of what we're talking about.
that's true,
Because
they
we were
do.
talking about like how a lot of gay male witches are the forefront of our community. Um, I think what it really comes down to in the queer community is that it's kind of the same. It's the same issue. Is that you're I don't know, you're viewed as lesser if
I
you're feminine.
I have a particular. Oh, that's true too, especially
Mhm.
amongst cis gay men,
Mhm.
or well, men who sleep with men.
Mhm.
Um, I also do want to also say this. There is also an issue that's not talked about as much anymore, but it's still very prevalent, is gay men hating on women.
Mm.
It's like this, you know how like they talk about envy, like a boob envy, or
Ah.
there's a strange like woman envy amongst gay men.
Which just translates into misogyny,
Mm-hmm.
into
Oh well,
treating women as
I
lesser, even
personally,
though they envy them.
I think it's the same. I mean, well, I also think this. Anyway.
Well, I know, yeah, technically, I always just kind of viewed misogyny, like I know technically the definition of misogyny, but like the idea of misogyny is putting women down, like to
Right.
put them down. But what's interesting is how you can put someone down while also being envious of them.
That happens all the time.
I just,
Look at internalized homophobia.
yeah, and I was thinking about this earlier. I was like, growing up, I had a lot of internalized transphobia.
I had a lot of internalized homophobia, and in the guise of fear. I was afraid of being gay.
For me, I was like, especially as younger, like people were like, why don't you just be a guy? And I was like, how dare you? Like, how dare you suggest that I would do that?
Yeah.
It was like that's gross. It's disgusting. Like, no, it's unnatural. Like all the same arguments that people use and actually mean. Um,
Yeah.
mhm,
I get it, and like I still have a friend who every once in a while still has his woman envy.
mhm,
Um he was much worse when we were younger. Oh my god.
really.
Oh my god. I would be like, and even then I've never had like a woman everything. Like I've
Mhm,
never downplayed a woman for any reason. I've actually was raised by very powerful women my whole life. So I've always admired women more
mhm,
so than men because I always saw them as stronger, just more resilient
mhm.
and overall. But for my friend, he would like say some pretty like damn, you know.
Yeah.
Um thankfully he cooled down as he's getting older, but cooled way down. He hasn't said anything in a very long time, but I've heard it slip like maybe about a year and a half ago, 2 years ago. You know what I mean?
Oh, yikes. That's
Yeah.
never good.
But yeah, that is a thing that still happens, especially among very feminine gay men.
Mhm,
Um, very feminine gay men. They do that more so than anybody else.
mhm.
Yeah.
I would agree there. They tend to be one of the more problematic. Those, and I find that in the lesbian community, a lot of them are not fans of trans people, either in the sense of trans women. They feel threatened by trans women, and they are also repulsed by trans men. So I'm not saying all lesbians. This is not a blanket statement for anyone. I'm just saying,
No, neither
in
of
the
us think
lesbian
so.
community, when you encounter those type of people, it's usually feeling threatened by trans women, being like, oh well, that trans woman is actually just a man, and they just want to look at women. They just want to be in a. They're only saying they're a lesbian. They're only being in a lesbian space so they can have access to women. But I'm like, but not in a predatory way. They're in a lesbian space because they are a woman and they want to be around other women.
Right.
you know, Shocker, right?
Right.
But trans men are kind of, I think, one of the more I think for me, it's a little bit more difficult for me to figure out which group that I associate with. Because I think the group that I'm most comfortable with is usually just queer men. I'm not really ever comfortable with straight men, and I'm starting to become increasingly uncomfortable with the lesbian community. I don't really feel welcome there anymore. I get it, they don't. I'm not a woman, so I get it. But I think it's mostly just like queer men that I feel the most comfortable with at all times. I think that's my new I don't know, group that I gravitate toward. Um, but I kind of want to wrap up this whole discussion on misogyny. It's such a big topic, and I don't want to. I'm not trying to say that we're trying to cover the entire topic in one single episode. I am more than positive, and especially when Sophia can talk again, I would love to revisit this so that way she can actively be engaged in the conversation, because I am sure that she has a ton of additional stories and all kinds of things that she can add to this. So I definitely want to revisit this again. I just wanted to talk about it now to kind of pave the way toward a future discussion, and also because I have just been seeing so much of this shit in all sorts of magic groups and all sorts of just in the queer community and just everywhere right now, and it's been driving me insane. I can't stand it. I have a friend who's going through just all kinds of shit right now, and it's her own brother that's the problem. So it's not good, and I really just wanted to address it in this episode. I think overall it's one of those things. I don't know if we can ever get rid of it. I don't know if I'd like to believe that we can as a society, that we can get rid of this misogynist. Um, but my thought is maybe it would just be replaced with something worse. I don't know. I don't know. Um, but I think in the magic community, probably one of the best ways to combat it is to just kind of quash those people. Don't give them a platform anymore. Don't give them a platform to spout their bullshit. So I think it's really up to these moderators of these groups to really take a stand. Like, don't pussyfoot around, you know, stopping bullshit when you see it. You
I
know?
would argue too that it would be up to moderators on queer groups as well.
Mhm. Yeah, like don't let people just go in there and just trash talk each other and just put it down. Just shut down the whole damn conversation. Now, granted, in a way, like, yeah, you're not really taking either side. Yes, you're silencing both parties, but you're also just not giving the attacker to the space to continue going on and on and on. So I think that magic groups as a whole, we can do better. I think we need to give more space to women. We need to open up, and we need to hear their voices, because they're being overpowered by the voices of men, which should not be the case. I'm not saying that women should overpower men either. We need more of a balance, and it needs to happen sooner rather than later.
I agree.
hmm So I think we're just gonna kind of wrap it up there.
Yeah.
Um, we've been quiet on social media. We have a lot going on right now.
We do.
I'm moving. Scott's going back to school. I have Pagan Pride Day coming up. We're still putting out the podcast. We've just been kind of quiet on social media.
Yeah.
Sorry,
I'm
we
also
have.
trying to get a job.
Yeah, and we have still been putting out we did our second issue of our zine, which comes out every new moon cycle, and you can access that if you are a Patreon subscriber. Just the
And I
$1
put up a
here.
really cool spell for the most recent one. I was
Yes.
like super proud of that spell.
Yes, I did like that, and I went on this whole. I unveiled my brainchild, that is the queer wheel of the year, which overlaps with the Wildwood Tarot wheel of the year. And it was like a whole thing. So in order to read it, you'd be a $1 patron, on Patreon, and you can see all of that. So this is going to be posted tomorrow, which is Wednesday.
On
I
Wednesday.
don't like working this close down to the wire, but it's okay. And I think we have each season is going to be 5 episodes. This is episode 2 of this season, and then so we have 3 more episodes to go, and then we'll take a little break, which is good because it'll coincide right about like when we're all getting settled into our new things that we're doing in our lives. Then we take a little break, and then we come back.
Yep.
And by our second season, I'm pretty sure Sophia should be back by then.
Yeah.
So the rest of the season, it'll just be me and Scott, and I hope you like the idea of Sophia doing a little write-up and us reading it in the beginning. If you find that we could do it a different way or however you want to do it, just leave a suggestion because I'd like to get your feedback on this. But yeah, for now, I think we're just going to sign off here and say everyone have a good day, and we'll see you in the next episode.
Bye.
Bye.
Hello everyone, Scott here. I've been reading tarot for over 10 years. I am an intuitive reader, and through my readings I try to give guidance to aid my clients in navigating their lives. To schedule a reading with me, you can find me on Facebook at WytchWyse, Seer, and Witch. You can also find me over on Instagram and Tumblr with the handle WytchWyse, spelled WYTCHWYSE. You can find links to all of my social media in the show notes. I hope to hear from you.